The distant hum of engines echoed through the cold, dark void of space. It was almost peaceful, yet something felt wrong. On the bridge of Earth's flagship, Commander Evelyn Harris watched the empty stretch of stars ahead. The sensors had been quiet for hours, but that was about to change. A strange signal appeared on the radar, unlike anything they had seen before. The frequency was sharp and unnatural, a signal that sent a chill down every crew member's spine. It wasn't supposed to be there. There were no ships nearby, no transmissions from any known species. The sound grew louder, the source drawing closer. For a moment, no one spoke. Every officer on the bridge was frozen in place, staring at the screens as the unknown signal pulsed through their systems. The Zorith, a terrifying alien species that had been attacking planets across the galaxy, were on their way. Earth was just one of many planets they had targeted. And now, it seemed, the time had come for humanity to face their most dangerous enemy. No longer was there any question of what was coming. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and the war for Earth's survival had begun. Yet, amid the fear and uncertainty, Commander Harris knew one thing. Earth had one weapon they had never used before, one secret that had been kept hidden for years. But would it be enough to stop the Zorith, or had the galaxy already written humanity's obituary? The atmosphere on Earth was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Every human soldier across the galaxy, every officer in command, and every scientist in the deep corners of the military base knew what had to be done. In a hidden facility, deep within Earth's most secure military base, the most feared human in history was being prepared for action. His name was known to a select few, whispered in secret conversations, and rarely spoken aloud. His existence had become a legend among the stars. He was a soldier who had been involved in the early battles between humanity and the galaxy's most dangerous species, but after the war, he disappeared into the shadows. It was said he was too dangerous, even for Earth, and had gone into hiding. But now, in the face of annihilation, humanity had no choice. It was time to bring him back. When they first found him, he was a man broken by the war, but one who had endured things no other human had ever experienced. He had powers beyond what was considered possible, powers that the Zorith feared most. The galaxy had always believed that humans were weak, that they could be easily destroyed. But they were wrong. The legend of this human warrior would prove them wrong once again. As the human stood before the military council, ready to face the unknown, there was no fear in his eyes. He had seen things worse than this, faced enemies who had wiped out entire worlds. But Earth was his home, and he would not let it fall. The silence in the room was deafening as the decision was made. He would be sent into the heart of the Zorith forces. He was humanity's last hope, their secret weapon. As he stepped into the transport ship, the engines roared to life, and he looked one last time at Earth. His heart burned with purpose. He was no longer just a man. He was humanity's salvation. The galaxy had no idea what was coming for them. The journey through space felt endless. The ship hummed softly, cutting through the dark void, but the silence on board was anything but peaceful. The human warrior sat alone in the small chamber, his eyes closed, his mind focused. He had been called back for a purpose, to stop the Zorith and defend his people. It was a job he had done before, but it was different now. This time, it wasn't just a mission. It was the survival of Earth itself. He had been trained for battles, for war, for loss. His past was filled with darkness, with memories of comrades lost and entire worlds destroyed. But he had never faced an enemy like the Zorith. They were ruthless, powerful, and relentless. Yet he wasn't afraid. He knew fear. It was something that could be overcome, something that could be controlled, and he had mastered it long ago. As the ship's sensors beeped softly, signaling the approach of a distant planet, the warrior stood up, stretching his muscles. His uniform, once pristine and sharp, was now worn, as though it had seen countless battles. The armor that had once been fitted perfectly to his body now seemed a part of him. He was no longer just a man wearing armor. The two had become one. On Earth, the military leaders watched the ship's progress from a secure command center. They were anxiously awaiting news, waiting to see if their secret weapon would live up to the legend. They knew this was humanity's last chance. They had no backup, no other forces that could even come close to matching the Zorath. This was it. And as they stared at the screens, they could only hope that the human warrior's powers were real, that the stories were not just myths. As the human ship entered the atmosphere of a distant planet under Zorath control, he could already feel the weight of the battle ahead. The ground beneath him shook as the ship landed, and he stepped out, his boots thudding against the metal surface. He wasn't alone. Zorath's soldiers surrounded the area, watching the human with suspicion. They had heard the rumors, of course. They knew who he was, and they knew what he was capable of. But seeing him in person was a different matter entirely. Without saying a word, the human moved, his body shifting with the kind of precision that could only come from years of combat training. In an instant, he was upon the Zorath, his movements fast and deadly. The soldiers barely had time to react as he tore through their ranks, his fists and feet delivering blows that sent them flying. Each strike was calculated, each move a part of a greater strategy. The Zorath had never seen anything like it. They had faced the might of entire planets, the firepower of fleets and armies, but nothing could compare to this. This human was not just strong, he was something more. As he fought, the Zorath realized that they were facing something they couldn't understand, a force of nature they couldn't stop. The human didn't hesitate. He moved with purpose, taking down one soldier after another, his focus unwavering. His enemies fell before him, and for a moment, it seemed like the Zorath might finally be starting to realize that they were not the most powerful species in the galaxy anymore. After what felt like hours, but in reality had only been minutes, the Zorath stopped attacking. They were regrouping, trying to find a way to stop him, but the human didn't give them that chance. He had learned long ago that in a fight, hesitation was death. So he kept pushing forward, moving faster than they could anticipate. By the time the Zorath realized what was happening, they were already in retreat. But the human was not finished. He wasn't here to win small battles. He wasn't here to be a hero. He was here to end the war. The human continued to chase them, his determination relentless. The Zorath were beginning to panic. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. They had underestimated humanity once, and now, as they watched this one human tear through their forces, they began to realize the mistake they had made. Far away on the command center, the military leaders of Earth were watching the live footage, amazed at what they were seeing. The human warrior was unstoppable. They had never imagined it would be like this. In their darkest moments, they had hoped he would be able to make a difference. But this was beyond their expectations. Back on the planet's surface, the human warrior stood tall as the Zorath forces retreated, their once proud ranks scattered and broken. He wasn't done yet. He had a message for them. A message that the Zorath would hear, loud and clear. Humanity would not go quietly into the night. No matter the odds, no matter the enemies they faced, humanity was not to be underestimated. The Zorath had made a grave mistake, and now they would pay for it. The human warrior stood on the battlefield, the wreckage of Zorath ships scattered around him. He had never imagined it would be this easy. The Zorath, once a force feared by countless civilizations, were running. They were retreating. And it was all because of one human, him. The alien soldiers that had once seemed unstoppable now lay in heaps, their advanced technology broken and useless. He could feel the adrenaline in his veins, but it wasn't excitement that fueled him. It was something deeper, something far more dangerous. This was his purpose. This was what he was meant to do. He had been trained for this very moment, to fight back when humanity's survival was at risk. And now, the world knew that the legends were true. The human warrior had returned. But this wasn't a victory, not yet. There was still so much to be done. The Zorath had been pushed back, but they weren't defeated. The human knew they would regroup, and when they did, they would be even more dangerous. They were an enemy unlike any other, ruthless, calculating, and determined to see their conquest of the galaxy succeed. He needed to finish this, and quickly. The human moved through the wreckage, scanning the horizon. His sharp eyes caught sight of something, a flicker of movement. He wasn't alone. The Zorath hadn't retreated completely. A smaller group of soldiers had remained behind, possibly to regroup or to sabotage the human's progress. He gritted his teeth, silently preparing himself for the next wave. With a fluid motion, he unsheathed his weapon, a blade unlike any the Zorath had ever seen. It hummed with power, a weapon forged for a warrior of his caliber. The Zorath soldiers didn't stand a chance. The human moved through them with precision, his every strike a calculated move. It was a dance of destruction, graceful, deadly, and unstoppable. As the last of the Zorath fell to the ground, the human wiped the blood from his blade and surveyed the area. He had eliminated the threat, but he knew this was only the beginning. The Zorath were not done with Earth, not by a long shot, and there were still more battles to come. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the military leadership was in shock. They had been watching the reports, the footage from the front lines. The human warrior had done what no one thought possible. They had expected him to help to slow the Zorath down, but they had never imagined he would drive them away. He had crushed their forces in record time. The Council had made the right decision, but the victory was bittersweet. They had no idea what the Zorath would do next. Would they launch a full-scale invasion? Or had this setback shaken their confidence so badly that they would reconsider their attack? The human warrior's success was unexpected, but it was only a temporary triumph. The galaxy was still at war. As the human made his way to the Zorath Command Center, a new message came through, one that would change everything. It was a transmission from a higher power, someone far more dangerous than the Zorath. The message was clear. They had underestimated humanity. And now, they were paying the price. The transmission ended with a chilling warning. The Zorath were not the only ones who had taken notice of humanity's newfound strength. The human paused, letting the words sink in. He wasn't alone. Someone else had been watching. And this new enemy was much more terrifying than the Zorath could ever be. The battle was far from over. The human stood still for a moment, the words from the mysterious transmission echoing in his mind. He could feel a cold chill in the air, even though he stood in the heat of the Zorath Command Center. Something was coming, something far more dangerous than the Zorath, and the warrior knew that his mission had just become much more complicated. The Zorath may have retreated for now, but there was no time to rest. The galaxy was about to change in ways they could not yet understand. Back on Earth, the command center was buzzing with activity. Military leaders were scrambling to interpret the message. Who had sent it? Why had they warned the Zorath? And why were they now turning their attention to humanity? The Council could barely comprehend the gravity of the situation. For the first time, they realized that humanity was no longer just fighting to survive. It was fighting to protect its very place in the galaxy. The warrior took a deep breath and continued forward. He knew the Zorath weren't the true threat. They were only pawns in a much larger game. There was something out there, something darker, and he had to stop it before it was too late. But what could he do alone? He had no idea who or what the new enemy was, but he had always known this was never going to be easy. The greatest challenges often came when you least expected them. As he moved through the command center, he found the remnants of the Zorath forces. They had left behind only their broken machines and fallen soldiers. But something wasn't right. The facility seemed abandoned, too quiet. The lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows along the walls. The warrior's senses were sharp, but even he could not predict what was waiting for him next. Suddenly, the floor beneath him trembled. It wasn't an explosion. It was something else, something bigger, as though the entire structure was shifting. The lights went out, leaving the warrior in total darkness. His instincts kicked in. He crouched low, listening for any sign of movement. His fingers tightened around his weapon, ready for whatever might come. Then the ground shook again, and a voice spoke through the darkness, a voice that chilled him to the bone. It wasn't Zoreth. It wasn't anything he had ever heard before. "You are brave, human," the voice echoed. "But bravery alone will not save you." A low growl rumbled through the command center, and then something stepped forward, its silhouette barely visible in the dim light. It was massive, a towering figure with glowing eyes that pierced through the dark. The human's heart skipped a beat. This was no Zoreth warrior. This was something else entirely. Without a word, the human sprang into action. His body moved faster than the eye could follow, his weapon raised to strike. But the creature was faster. With a movement as fluid as water, it dodged his attack and countered with a powerful swipe that sent him crashing against the wall. The force of the blow knocked the wind out of him, and for a moment, everything went blurry. He staggered to his feet, feeling the weight of the blow in his bones. The creature stood before him, its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. It was tall, with armored skin that seemed to shimmer in the darkness, and its mouth was filled with sharp, jagged teeth. The warrior's mind raced. This wasn't just an alien. This was a predator, something ancient and powerful, a creature built for destruction. "Humanity is a blip," the creature spoke again, its voice full of disdain. "You are nothing in the grand scheme of the universe. You cannot stop what is coming." The warrior narrowed his eyes. He wasn't about to let this thing intimidate him. It had already underestimated humanity once, and it was about to make the same mistake again. His weapon gleamed in his hand, and with a roar, he charged once more, faster and more precise than before. But this time, he was ready for the fight of his life. The creature moved with terrifying speed, but the human wasn't giving up. Every move, every strike was calculated, a battle of wills. The floor beneath them cracked as the battle raged on, the sound of blows echoing through the dark corridors. The warrior fought with every ounce of strength he had, knowing that if he failed now, everything he had fought for, everything humanity had fought for, would be lost. The creature let out a loud guttural growl, its claws slashing through the air. It was obvious that this enemy was more powerful than anything he had ever encountered, but the human wasn't backing down. He had learned to fight in the darkest of times, to endure when all seemed lost. He had been the hope that humanity clung to, and he wouldn't let them down now. Finally, with a last, desperate lunge, the human drove his weapon deep into the creature's chest. It howled in pain, but the human didn't relent. He twisted the blade, making sure the job was done. With a final, thunderous crash, the creature collapsed to the ground, its body disintegrating into a cloud of smoke and ash. Breathing heavily, the warrior stood over the fallen creature, his chest rising and falling with each breath. He had won this battle, but he knew this was only the beginning. The creature had been a harbinger of something much worse. The galaxy was in danger, and no matter what happened next, humanity would need to stand strong. The transmission from earlier, the voice that had warned of a new enemy, replayed in his mind. "Bravery alone will not save you," it had said. But the warrior knew one thing for sure. Humanity had something the galaxy had never seen before, a will to survive that nothing could break. The battle was far from over, and the human had only just begun. The silence that followed the battle was deafening. The warrior stood alone in the wreckage of the Zoreth command center, the remnants of the monstrous creature still dissolving into the air around him. Sweat dripped down his face, mixing with the dirt and blood from the fight. His body ached, but his mind was sharp. He had won, but this victory felt different, less like an end and more like the beginning of something much worse. As the last of the smoke cleared, he took a moment to compose himself, the weight of what was at stake settling in. The transmission from the unknown enemy still echoed in his ears. Humanity was now on their radar, and they weren't going to stop with the Zoreth. What would come next? What was the true face of the force that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting to make its move? He tapped into the communication system, sending a signal back to Earth. He needed to update the leadership. They had no idea what they were up against now, but he was about to tell them everything. Back on Earth, the military command was in full crisis mode. The warriors, the strategists, and the leaders were all gathered in the war room, looking at the data coming in. They had received the signal from the human warrior, but his message was nothing like they expected. "We fought the Zorith," he had said, "but they're just pawns. A much darker power is out there, and they've taken notice of us. I've seen what they can do, and it's not something we can fight off with normal tactics. We need a new strategy, and we need it now." The generals exchanged worried glances. They had hoped for a clear-cut victory, but the reality was much more complicated. Their most powerful weapon was not enough. They needed more, but what? How could they prepare for a force they had never encountered before? Meanwhile, the human warrior was already on his next mission. He couldn't wait for orders. He couldn't wait for Earth to catch up to the threat. He had always been a step ahead, and he was going to stay that way. His ship, though damaged, was still capable of travel. The Zorith may have retreated, but the human had seen the patterns. He knew that the enemy would regroup, and they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. He set course for the farthest reaches of the galaxy, where whispers of a hidden force had been circulating for years. An ancient race, older than the Zorith, and much more dangerous. If he could find their base, if he could discover their weakness, humanity would stand a chance. But that was a big if. As he sped through the galaxy, the human's mind raced. Could he really defeat this new enemy? Could humanity survive against something so ancient, so powerful? He knew that he wasn't alone in this fight. Earth had its strength, its determination, and its will to survive. But would it be enough? He arrived at a desolate, distant planet, the coordinates he had received from the mysterious transmission. The planet was uninhabited, but something didn't feel right. The air was thick, the skies swirling with dark clouds that seemed unnatural. As he landed his ship, he stepped out onto the rocky surface, his senses alert. This wasn't just a planet, it was a trap. The ground suddenly shook beneath his feet, and before he could react, the sky opened up with bright flashes of light. Ships, far more advanced than anything the human had ever seen, appeared out of nowhere, surrounding him. The warriors aboard these ships were unlike anything he had fought before. Their bodies were armored in strange, glowing materials, their weapons sleek and deadly. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but he wasn't afraid. He had faced impossible odds before, and he would do it again. The alien forces began to descend, their movements precise and fluid, as if they had done this countless times. The human gripped his weapon tightly, preparing for the next battle. This time, however, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for humanity's future. The leader of the new enemy stepped forward, their form barely visible behind their advanced armor. But one thing was clear, their presence was overwhelming. "You have caused us trouble, human," the voice boomed. "But you will learn, as others have before you, that no one stands against the ancients." The human didn't flinch. "I've faced worse," he replied coolly, his eyes locked on the enemies. "And you've underestimated humanity. That's your mistake." The two armies stood facing each other, the tension building. The warrior knew that this was the fight that would define the future of the galaxy. It wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about making sure humanity would have a place in the stars. The war for the galaxy was no longer about the Zorith or any single alien race. It was about survival, about pushing back against an overwhelming darkness that had stood for millennia. In the end, the human understood one thing. No matter how overwhelming the odds, humanity would never back down. They would fight, they would survive, and they would win. And the galaxy would know that no one, no matter how powerful, could ever ignore humanity again. The air was thick with tension as the two forces faced off. The human warrior's mind was racing. every possible scenario playing out in his head. He knew that this enemy, this ancient race, was unlike anything he had encountered before. But he also knew something else, something that had always been true. Humanity had survived the impossible before, and they could do it again. The enemy leader stepped forward, the glow of their armor casting an ominous light on the battlefield. It was difficult to gauge their exact size or shape behind the shifting energy field, but their presence alone sent a chill down the human spine. The warriors surrounding the leader were similarly imposing, their weapons drawn, ready to strike at any moment. It felt as though the very air itself was charged with a malevolent force. "You have a choice, human," the leader's voice echoed, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to reverberate through the ground beneath their feet. "Surrender now. Join us, and your species may continue to exist. Resist, and we will eradicate you, as we have done with countless others." The human warrior stood firm, the grip on his weapon tightening. His eyes locked onto the leader's, and for a moment, it felt like time slowed down. He had fought countless battles, faced enemies beyond imagination. But this was different. He wasn't just fighting for survival now. He was fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. "You underestimate us," the human spoke coldly, his voice unwavering. "You think we'll bow to threats, that we'll fold under your intimidation. But you're wrong. Humanity doesn't kneel. We fight." The enemy leader's helmeted head tilted slightly, as though considering the human's words. The silence stretched, the stillness hanging heavily in the air. The enemy's soldiers began to shift uneasily, their hands gripping their weapons with less confidence. The leader's eyes, glowing from behind the visor, flickered with a faint amusement. "Bravery. How quaint," they said, their voice dripping with disdain. "But it will not save you. Your species is insignificant in the grand scale of things. You are but a speck in the universe's vastness." The human took a step forward, his boots crunching on the rocky surface. "Then it's time you learned that even a speck can be a force to be reckoned with." Without warning, the battle erupted. The human charged, his blade flashing as it cut through the air. The ancient warriors moved to intercept him, their weapons clashing with his in a brilliant flurry of sparks and light. The human's movements were swift, every strike precise, each decision calculated. He had no time to waste. He couldn't afford to lose. Humanity's survival depended on this moment. But the enemy was relentless. Their weapons, advanced beyond anything the human had ever seen, slashed through the air with deadly precision. The human blocked a series of strikes, but he could feel the weight of their attacks pushing him back. They were too strong, too fast. His mind raced as he thought of his next move, his next strategy. Then, in the heat of the battle, the human caught sight of something, movement out of the corner of his eye, a flicker of light. Without hesitation, he pivoted, spinning away from a vicious blow, and hurled his blade at the source of the disturbance. The weapon sailed through the air, embedding itself in the heart of an incoming enemy soldier who would try to flank him. For a moment, the battlefield paused. The ancient warriors took a collective step back, their heads turning toward the fallen soldier. The human was gaining ground, slowly but surely. They hadn't expected such fierce resistance, and they hadn't counted on the human warrior's sheer determination. The leader let out a low, rumbling growl, clearly displeased. The surrounding warriors tightened their grip on their weapons, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty danced in their glowing eyes. This human was different. This human was a force of nature. "Impressive," the leader said, their voice cold and calculating. "But it won't be enough." At that moment, the ground beneath them trembled again, this time with more force. A rumble of energy reverberated across the battlefield, sending shockwaves through the terrain. The human stumbled, his balance momentarily thrown off as the earth cracked and split open. The ancient leader's eyes widened. The human didn't hesitate. He understood what was happening. The enemy was calling for reinforcements. A massive force was about to emerge from the depths of the planet itself. "We need to end this now," the human muttered to himself. He knew that if reinforcements arrived, the battle would turn in the enemy's favor, and humanity didn't have the luxury of waiting for backup. He had to finish this fight alone, or all would be lost. With a grunt, the warrior launched himself into the fray once again. He fought with a speed and intensity that seemed impossible, his blade cutting through the air like lightning. He was everywhere at once, dodging, striking, and overwhelming his enemies. His heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't let up. He couldn't. As the first wave of reinforcements began to emerge from the cracks in the earth, the human caught a glimpse of the battlefield's edge. There, standing alone, was the enemy leader. The human's mind made a snap decision. If he could take down the leader, perhaps he could break the enemy's morale and halt the incoming forces. With one final burst of energy, he dashed towards the leader, his eyes locked onto the target. The enemy leader raised their weapon, ready to strike, but the human was faster. With a powerful, precise strike, he disarmed the leader, sending their weapon flying through the air. The leader stumbled, caught off guard by the human's speed and strength. The human wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something greater, for the future of every living being in the galaxy. With a final move, the human drove his blade into the leader's chest, the battle ending in a flash of light. The leader crumpled to the ground, and the remaining warriors hesitated, uncertainty filling their ranks. They had lost their leader, their most powerful force, and now they were vulnerable. The human stood over the fallen leader, panting heavily, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The enemy soldiers were retreating, unsure of how to respond. The reinforcements were still coming, but the leader's fall had broken their resolve. The human knew that this wasn't over. There would be more battles to fight, more enemies to face, but for now, humanity had won. As the smoke cleared and the last of the ancient forces retreated into the darkness, the warrior looked up at the stars. The universe was vast, and humanity was still so small in comparison, but the warrior knew that humanity would never again be considered insignificant. They had proven that they could fight, and they would keep fighting, no matter what the galaxy threw at them. The human turned and made his way back to his ship. He had no time to celebrate. The real war was just beginning.